This is a reminder video on how I'm making my Hangul Anki deck at the moment. At the moment, the name of the deck is Reading Korean Hangul 101. And if you look inside this deck, there's a whole load of decks that I've added to it. Hangul is a little bit more complicated than reading Japanese hiragana or katakana, for example. But the steps are pretty similar, looking for the first half of the deck at least. So what I've basically done is for the first part of the deck, I've got Hangul practice for individual letters, and then I've got reading practice, which will give you words to practice with. So it goes Hangul, reading practice, Hangul, reading practice, in that kind of order. And I've tried to do it in a very sequential way, so each lesson kind of builds on itself so that you get the first group of letters in the first deck, and then with those small group of letters you can produce these simple words, and then you get the next group of letters, and then you get with all of these combined, you can make these words, and it goes in that kind of way, so it builds on itself. So by the time you get down to the to say double consonants, for example, you will be using all of these letters combined, if that kind of makes any kind of sense. If I just browse the deck, so for the first deck, you've got these groups of letters here.
그, 느, 무, 스.
Like so.
아.
It builds like that, and then with all of these letters combined, you can make all of these words.
시, 산, 문.
아이.
네.
Then you move on to the next group of letters, which are unvoiced consonants and the L letter.
드, 브, 즈.
And with all of those combined, you can make these words.
도, 사람, 자.
Like so, and so on and so forth. And so that's basically that. So all of the red decks here, these highlighted red, are the decks I haven't done yet, and all of the black decks is everything that I've done so far. It looks kind of complicated. I'm wondering if I can simplify the names of each of these decks in any way. It looks kind of complicated, but my aim is to be very comprehensive with learning Hangul. So the first half of this deck down to 13 is the first half is learning just the letters, like so, letters and words here. And the second half of the deck is batchim rules, or all of the sound changing rules, like so. So what I've got is I've made these reading practice sheets here. If I go to the top, you've got all of the basic letters here, and these are all of the words that you can make from it. This is I've basically collected all of these words from YouTube videos. So I'm not entirely sure if the meanings are correct or the spellings are correct. I'm slowly going through Yomitan with each word to check that everything is right. And it goes all the way down to 16 reading practices. So I might end up sharing this as a PDF for people to do. They can write what you do is you try to write the pronunciation and then the romanization if you want, and then you can learn the meaning at the same time. So it's reading practice. Yeah, it's what it says. And I've gone through each batchim rule. So there's about 7 or 8 batchim rules or sound change rules altogether. So what I recommend doing at the very beginning, before you start doing anything else, is learn the basic letters of Hangul and at the same time learn the batchim rules, because I've seen some quite advanced Korean speakers on YouTube that have learned the basic Hangul letters, but they haven't learned all of the sound change rules either. Until a very, very advanced level. And I think that these sound change rules are not too difficult. They're a little bit fiddly to learn, but they're not too difficult for a beginner. I think it's very worth learning the sound change rules at the very beginning as you learn the Hangul letters, because you will be getting a more comprehensive, you will be learning more comprehensively if you do so. And when you see these batchim rules out in the wild, you'll be able to recognize them, and you will have already studied them and had an explanation for them. And so doing these batchim rules at the beginning I think is definitely worth it, because it helps, it saves the teacher having to explain them when they happen in common words and stuff. So like I said, there are some quite advanced Korean speakers that I've seen on YouTube who have asked the questions about these sound change rules. They're like saying, why does it do this? Why does the pronunciation sound so different to the spelling? Well, it's just the sound changing rule that you need to learn, and they sound pretty technical, like consonant relinking, intensification, aspiration, so forth. But they're pretty simple, really. It's just a couple of letter changes in the batchim position, which you have to learn as well, which is like the final consonant sound change. If that makes any sense. So this is my Reading Korean Hangul 101 deck that I'm learning. And I'm at the moment up to aspirated consonants reading practice. So if I just go to my Anki card format, this is the setup that I've got at the moment. I've got it set to reading practice 5, aspirated consonants. And at the moment, I might change the note type to something else, like Korean Hangul note basic or something like that. At the moment, it's just called Korean Basic, a basic note type. This is the setup I've got right now. Close out of there. And I've got I've got this text hooker page set up, and I've copied, if I go back to lesson 5, aspirated letters, aspirated words with aspirated letters in them. And I've copied the letters into the text hooker, and I'm going to use Yomitan to create the cards with. So let's start with this one.
한글,
Hangul. So with an aspirated letter here, H, you can create the word Hangul. So if I just create the card. Move this over. That says Hangul.
한글,
So all I need to do is type in the romanization.
한글, 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 한글,
Like so. And I've set up the cards by frequency as well, so it should reorder itself by frequency. And it's got a note here saying that these words contain aspirated consonants. This is the kind of sequence in the course that I'm making. So then I'll just delete this and move on to the next word.
커피,
Copy, which means coffee. I'll just delete all of this because make it simple. Copy.
커피, 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 커피,
Copy. Coffee. So also I'll make a note about the romanization. I'm using my own style of romanization. People will probably complain about this a little bit, but I've made my own simplified. Romanization in Korean is a little bit complicated, so but I've managed to make my own style, which I think is easier to read. And also at a certain point in the deck, I will change over to using Hangul in here for the pronunciation. But for now, I'm just using this simplified form. Like, for example, the R here is an AH, which is pronounced R in English, or R. I think that's a pretty simplified. And the aspirated consonants have this little punctuation here to signify that it's a breathed k. I think that's pretty simple. All right, let's try another example. Let's move on to here. 노트, 노트,
노트,
노트. So this would be N-O T, note, which it's just notebook.
노트,
Note. Yeah, so you can see that the romanization probably takes a little bit of getting used to. I'm used to it. Obviously, this is my personal preference for romanizing the letters, and it doesn't go the opposite direction. If you have just the romanization, you won't necessarily be able to spell out in Hangul properly, because some of the letters have the same phonetic sound, for example, but I'm just going to be using it from Hangul to romanization, not romanization to Hangul. So for what I'm using it for, it's fine. Let's make another one. Next one is grapes. Porto. Podo.
포도,
And as you can see, the English definition is working at the moment. Everything seems to be correct. If I find a different definition, I'll change it in the worksheet. 포도.
포도,
포도. Okay, next one, skirt. 치마. 치마.
치마,
치마, skirt.
치마,
치마. So I've done a few words already. If I go to the deck, you can see that the sort field is the frequency number, so it's kind of automatically sequencing it by frequency. So the first word is actually going to be,
커피,
actually happens to be coffee so far, which is the first word that I actually made.
한글,
Oh no, Hangul was the first word I made.
노트,
So it's sequencing them by frequency, which I think is quite neat.
치마,
치마.
포도,
포도. A lot of the Korean words with the two syllables are easier to learn. They're easier to learn because there are a lot of words with just one syllable. which I find are much more difficult to remember for some reason. The 2-syllable words are much easier to remember. That's just a note. I haven't got any examples here, but oh yeah, this next one, for example,
차,
means tea, and it also means car. Well, cha is quite easy to remember because it's the same in English, isn't it? Cha, tea. Okay, let's add that one. Cha, tea, also car. Get rid of all of this.
차,
T, car. And that frequency is quite low, so that word will probably come first in the deck so far. 친구,
친구,
친구. Friend, fellow, dude. 친구, 친구. That sounds familiar, that word, for some reason. 친구. Get rid of that one. Friend, fellow.
친구,
친구. Next one. Ooh, mobile phone. Okay.
핸드폰,
Ooh, 핸드폰. 핸드폰. Oh, there's a couple of choices here. Let's have a look.
핸드폰,
Oh, that one sounds better.
핸드폰,
Well, they both sound okay.
핸드폰,
I choose this one though, the second one.
핸드폰,
Okay, let's try. On 핸드폰. Mobile phone, cellular phone.
핸드폰,
Mobile phone, cellular phone.
핸드폰,
핸드폰. So you can see how strange my romanization is. But hopefully, if you start from the very beginning, you can get an idea of how the romanization that works in this deck. And people will probably complain about it, but never mind. It's just what I've chosen to do. I do believe that there's too much fuss around romanization. It gets too complicated and there are too many different versions of it, and this is my simplified version, so anyway, yeah. Okay, then moving on. Ooh, there's some good words in this one.
컴퓨터,
컴퓨터, 퓨터. 그 컴퓨터 컴퓨터
컴퓨터,
컴퓨터 그 right. So that's what computer looks like. Computer.
편지, 편지,
편지.
편지, 편지, 편지,
편지.
편지,
편지. Whoa, this is a big word.
가르치다,
Ooh.
가르치다,
Ooh.
가르치다, 가르치다,
가르치다, 가르치다,
가르치다. 가르치다.
가르치다,
가르치다. To teach. To instruct.
가르치다,
To teach, to instruct.
가르치다,
Basically that's it. That's all I want to show in this video. I've got a few more to do here, which I can do on my own. But that's basically how I'm making my Korean Hangul deck at the moment. And if you have any comments, if you have anything to say, leave them down in the comments. Nice one. Cheers.